Picture this. You're the United States. You have satellites that can read heat through clouds, stealth bombers that can cross continents, precision weapons that can hit a doorway at night. And your opponent has turned their most dangerous capability into something you cannot reliably see, cannot reliably count, and cannot reliably finish. Not because you lack power, because they designed their strategy around one brutal idea. If you cannot find it, you cannot win. This is the Iran war trap. A war where victory is not just expensive, it's economically toxic. Because even if America wins the air campaign, even if it destroys hundreds of sites, even if it dominates the sky, the bill doesn't end when the bombing stops. The bill moves into oil prices, shipping insurance, inflation, replacement stockpiles, and political pressure at home. And the worst part is this. The only way to guarantee the mission might require the one option America cannot afford, politically or financially: boots on the ground. So the question isn't, can America win? The question is, what does winning even mean here? And why does every definition of victory come with a price tag that makes the victory feel like a loss? To understand the trap, you need to understand two things at the same time: how hard it is to destroy a dispersed missile force from the air, and why Iran doesn't need to win the military fight to win the economic fight. Because Iran's core strategy is not to outgun America, it's to outlast America. Let's go step by step. First, the historical lesson everyone forgets the moment the bombs start falling. In 1991, during the Gulf War, the coalition had total air superiority. The mission was straightforward: kick Iraq out of Kuwait. That part worked. But inside the war, there was a second mission that turned into a nightmare: find and destroy Iraq's Scud missiles, not the factories, not the launch pads, the launchers themselves. Because Iraq was firing missiles at Israel, and every missile carried a political risk. If Israel entered the war, the coalition could fracture. So the coalition threw enormous effort at the Scud hunt: sorties, analysts, surveillance, strike packages, and the result was humiliatingly unclear. Mobile launchers moved, hid, fired, and disappeared back into the road network. By the time a strike arrived, the target was gone. It was like trying to punch smoke. The missiles were eventually dismantled after the war, on the ground, through inspections and physical control. That is the key lesson. Air power can destroy fixed infrastructure. Air power struggles to guarantee the destruction of a dispersed mobile force. Now, scale that problem up. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is larger, more mountainous, more prepared, more hardened, and it has spent decades building a deterrent designed for one job: survive the first wave. Because if the regime survives, the capability survives. And if the capability survives, Iran keeps leverage. Iran's missile force is not just a pile of rockets. It's the substitute for everything sanctions made hard. Iran cannot easily build a modern air force at Western standards. It cannot buy fleets the way Gulf states can. It cannot rely on open access to global arms markets. So it invested in what it could build: missiles, drones, underground storage, dispersal logistics, redundancy. Think of it like a company that can't compete on premium branding. So it competes on volume, resilience, and distribution. Iran didn't build a single crown jewel that can be knocked out in one night. It built a system. Underground storage complexes carved into rock, hardened sites, multiple regions, decoys, redundant command structures, a culture of concealment. And that leads to the first trap. Trap 1. Destroying the visible part is not the same as destroying the capability. A bomb can collapse an entrance. That does not guarantee what's behind the entrance is gone. A strike can damage a facility. That does not guarantee the inventory was there in the first place. In a conflict like this, the attacker is always fighting uncertainty. Every time you drop a precision weapon on a tunnel complex, you are buying a probability, not a certainty. And probability is expensive, because to push probability toward certainty, you need repetition, more strikes, more surveillance, more sorties, more time. That is how costs become runaway. But even that isn't the worst part. The worst part is that Iran's dispersal strategy turns its missile force into something that looks like civilian logistics. A missile can be moved by truck. A truck can look like any other truck. And Iran is not short on trucks. If you can move critical assets through normal commerce, you become almost invisible from the sky. You don't need a secret convoy. You need traffic. That creates the second trap. Trap 2. Surveillance becomes the war. To find mobile launchers, you need an ocean of eyes. Persistent drones, recon aircraft, satellite time, signal intelligence, pattern analysis. You need to watch roads, valleys, mountain passes, and likely launch zones. You need to do it continuously. You need to do it across a country with complex terrain. And even then, you are chasing a time problem. A mobile unit can set up, fire, and relocate quickly. The strike process often moves slower. Detect, verify, authorize, deconflict, strike, assess. That gap is where mobile forces live. So what does the attacker do? It starts bombing everything adjacent to the problem. Road networks, warehouses, command centers, fuel depots, ports, air defenses, anything that might constrain movement. That can degrade capability, but it also creates a huge economic footprint. And it still doesn't guarantee the missiles are gone. Now, bring in the part the military briefings rarely emphasize. The war is not only fought in Iran, it is fought in global markets. Trap 3, Iran's leverage is not land. It is oil architecture. Iran sits next to the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow corridor that has carried roughly a fifth of global oil flows in recent years. When conflict escalates in the Gulf, markets respond instantly. Risk becomes a premium added to every barrel. Insurance prices rise. Shipping routes change. Buyers panic. Storage fills. Prices whip. And here's the key. Iran doesn't need to defeat American aircraft to trigger that. It only needs to make the route feel unsafe. Mining threats, missile threats, drone swarms, harassment of tankers, proxy attacks on infrastructure. Even the rumor of disruption is expensive. Recent reporting in March 2026 shows the strait has been heavily disrupted during the current war, with traffic far below normal levels and major energy market volatility. That is the economic judo. Iran cannot outspend the United States in direct firepower, so it tries to force the United States to pay a global price for staying, because the cost does not just land on the Pentagon. It lands on gasoline, food, shipping, and inflation. And inflation is political. So now the question becomes darker. What does America need for a real victory? If the declared objective is to permanently remove Iran's missile deterrent, the air campaign alone is unlikely to guarantee it. Not because American weapons are weak, because the target is designed to be unfinishable from the air. So, winning becomes a menu of bad options. Option 1. Declare success based on degradation. You strike fixed sites, you damage infrastructure, you reduce launch rates, you destroy some stored inventory, you degrade command and control. Then you stop. You claim the threat is reduced. Iran survives, rebuilds, adapts, and hardens further. The bill is huge. the uncertainty remains. Option 2. Escalate into a long campaign of periodic strikes. The doctrine is simple. You cannot eliminate the capability, so you manage it. You hit it whenever it grows too strong. No end date, no clean finish, just maintenance warfare. This is politically corrosive because every year the public asks why the bill is still arriving. Option 3. The unspoken option. A ground campaign to physically clear, seize, and control underground sites and launch networks. In other words, inspections with rifles. It is the only way to turn probability into certainty. It is also the one option that would be brutally expensive in blood, time, and global legitimacy. Iran is large. The terrain is difficult. The population is huge. The political environment is hostile. The region is combustible. And Americans do not have an appetite for another open-ended land war in the Middle East. So, if America cannot take option 3, the definition of victory shrinks. And Iran understands that. This is why the trap works. The defender's goal is not to win the sky. It is to make the attacker's victory conditions unattainable without paying a cost the attacker cannot stomach. Now add a final layer that makes the economics even uglier. War is also an industrial cycle. Every missile fired needs replacement. Every precision weapon dropped needs replenishment. Stockpiles matter. Production capacity matters. Time to manufacture matters. And in prolonged conflicts, the replacement economy becomes its own engine. Contracts surge. Production lines accelerate. Budgets expand. Political incentives shift. This doesn't require conspiracy. It's mechanical. War creates demand for war goods, and that demand competes with domestic priorities. So who pays? Everybody does. If oil stays volatile, consumers pay. If shipping premiums surge, retailers pay, then consumers pay. If inflation rises, central banks respond, and borrowers pay. If budgets grow, taxpayers pay. The bill is distributed. That is what makes the Iran war trap so dangerous. It spreads. Iran also has one more advantage that wealthy countries often underestimate: pain tolerance. Iran has lived under pressure for decades. Isolation has already rewired the economy. The state has already proven it will impose hardship internally to preserve strategic capability. Meanwhile, America is fighting this while managing domestic polarization, fiscal pressures, and a public that has limited patience for strategic ambiguity. Rich countries are powerful. They are also politically sensitive to prolonged discomfort. So here is the uncomfortable conclusion. America might dominate the battlefield and still lose the economic war, not because Iran is stronger, but because Iran's strategy is built around turning American strength into a cost. You send a $2 billion platform to drop a precision weapon on a target that might be empty. You spend weeks hunting a launcher that can relocate in minutes. You run surveillance at a scale that burns money faster than your opponent can even imagine spending. And in the background, global energy markets react to risk in real time. In 1991, the coalition struggled to eliminate a mobile missile threat even with total air superiority. The solution came after the war, on the ground. In a conflict with Iran, the scale is larger, the terrain is harsher, and the preparation is deeper. So the war ends in one of three ways. Not with a trophy, with a definition. Either America defines victory as temporary degradation and Iran rebuilds, or America defines victory as permanent removal and faces the ground war price. Or America defines victory as a long-term mowing cycle and accepts a permanent bill. That is why America can't afford to win. Because the only version of win that ends the problem is the version that creates a bigger one. And the only versions that are politically survivable leave the underlying leverage intact. Iran doesn't need to win. It needs to remain dangerous enough that the cost of finishing the job becomes unacceptable. That is the trap. If you want more stories like this, where the real battlefield is the spreadsheet behind the headlines, subscribe to The Paper Fortress. Because wars are not just fought with weapons, they are fought with budgets, supply chains, and the ability to endure costs longer than your opponent can tolerate. And that is where empires get tested.